He's suffocating eyes. So he's just a
So I did watch TFW No GF recommended by Farino, and I thought of Aragorn. I thought of how Aragorn is this raggy-haired, dirty guy who works a 9-to-5 job as a Chicago cop. And he sits in the corner of the bar and he's smoking his pipe, and he doesn't talk to women. He doesn't talk to girls because they're all thoughts. And then he wants Eowyn. He wants the waifu. He wants the anime pillow. Eowyn is kind of Asian in the movies. Does anyone else get that vibe? I mean, just kind of I don't know if maybe I'm just projecting. So does the eyes? I don't know. Anyway, she's not like blonde haired or anything. She's got this long, silky black hair. Kind of reminds you of Kim Jong-un's sister, right? High cheekbones, long face. Anyway, so Aragorn, he could go to Gondor. He could become a politician. Because Denethor is currently president of Gondor. He could go to Gondor. He could try to form like a political party. He could try to, claim his rightful title as King of Gondor. He could try to create incremental political change, but it's like no one's going to even believe that he's the son of Isildur. No one's even going to believe him. He walks in there. He's this greasy. He doesn't know his table manners. He doesn't know his salad fork from his steak fork. He doesn't have the manners. It's the white city. It's Silicon Valley. He doesn't know how to fit in. He doesn't have all the liberal, high class sensibilities to fit into Gondor, the political class. So he writes that off. He says, well, I can't do that. And every day I go to my job, I kill the orcs. I go to the forest, I kill the orcs. The orcs come back, I kill them again. It's just on and on and on. Nothing ever changes. And so it's like, why even bother? Why even bother? Eowyn's dad is not going to accept me. She's too good for me. She's going to live forever. I'm just this pitiful little mortal. Aragorn has pretty low self-esteem at this point. And then there's this ring, right? And he sees in the ring this concentrated evil. And so he decides, he's like, well, I have nothing to lose. We're probably going to fail. But my two choices are I can put all my blood, sweat, and tears into trying to destroy this ring and then actually do something. Like, even if there's a 0% chance, it's still like a chance. You know what I mean? Like, even if it's impossible, at least the idea is if I can destroy this ring or help destroy this ring, then I will have actually mattered. My life will have mattered. Whereas if I go to Gondor, nothing's going to ever change in Gondor. It's always going to be the same. If I try to do anything else, if I try to, get Eowyn, eventually I'm going to die and she's going to be lonely and it's all going to be a mess and I'm just going to make her sad and then she's going to want to become mortal for me and that's going to make me sad and the whole thing's tragic. It's like why even emotionally invest in it? Why not just sit in the bar and smoke in the corner? And who cares, right? But when the ring comes along, it's like, well, I have nothing to lose. I've got nothing going for me. But maybe if we destroy this ring, then something will change. Like, this is going to be monumental. Like, it's going to change Middle-earth forever. I'm going to be part of history. And when Aragorn starts doing that, he doesn't do it as like, oh, this is a Machiavellian plot to position myself as the new king of Gondor. That's not how he starts out. But because he actually, he's no longer working the 9 to 5 job, because killing orcs, he was getting A's, he was getting B's, he was killing orcs, and it was what it was. And he never actually unleashed his potential. He never actually tapped into his inner strength. He never actually confronted himself with real challenges that shook him to the core and made him question if he was going to live or die. He never actually had to save his friends' lives before. He was killing orcs, but he was just like, it was just a 9 to 5 job. Now he's like saving the lives of the hobbits. Like, the fate of Middle Earth rests in his hands. It's important what he's doing. Therefore, he's important. And even though it's like this constant struggle between, I'm a shy boy and I'm weak and I don't want to be king of Gondor. It's like ultimately these experiences draw out the power in him and draw out this sense that he needs to be responsible, not just for himself, but he needs to be responsible for the world, for what happens in the world. Like, the weight of the world is on his shoulders, and he needs to accept that responsibility. And so in accepting that responsibility, he finally accepts the fact that, like, he has to be king of Gondor because no one else can, because he's the last heir of Isildur, and there's, like, no other choice. Whether he likes it or not, whether he is vainglorious or prideful, or whether he likes to stand in front of the crowds and wave at the people, whether that's embarrassing, whether he's a little bit autistic and maybe he doesn't like people and maybe he'd rather be alone somewhere. But it's like he understands finally. He's like, I have to do this. But he doesn't do it for himself. He doesn't do it, again, for his own power. He doesn't do it because, the chicks dig guys with crowns. He does it because it's like a plot point in destroying the ring. He's like, well, if we're going to destroy this ring, like, I need to get Gondor together so we can actually muster a force to distract Sauron so that Frodo can get that ring in the fire. So it's like, to serve a purpose. Like, he finds his purpose in this concentrated evil. And so really, I guess, I keep hearing these claims made that evil is insubstantial, that evil doesn't exist. It's like the absence of God. Like, this is something I've been hearing from Christians for a while, and I've just never really gotten it on a basic level, because I've always felt that without the ring in the Lord of the Rings, like, things just keep getting worse and worse. Like, Denethor goes through his Joe Biden Alzheimer's, like, Gondor becomes worse, crime increases, you're getting raids more, you're probably getting orcs coming in, orc immigration. You've got, what else have you got? You've got, like, the Shire, Bilbo's getting old in the Shire, like, more kids are getting hooked on the smoke weed or whatever, and just all kinds of degeneration, because there's nothing to fight for, there's nothing to fight against. And so it's like, all right, well, let's just be apathetic. Like, who cares? Like, let's go to our 9 to 5 jobs, let's pretend everything is okay. And it's awesome, Sauron is defeated and there's nothing to do anymore, so let's just, this is the best of all possible worlds. But actually, it's the worst of all possible worlds. Like, it makes things worse. And I was doing a bit of Bible reading. I was picking up where we left off in the New Testament, and I was getting to that point where it starts talking about how Jesus is saying things like the meek will inherit the earth, and you always look at that and you're like, what the heck does that mean? That sounds like just an inversion. This is like, you read it with like a Nietzschean lens and you're like, this is ridiculous. But then I started thinking about it. It said, the meek in spirit, blessed are the meek in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth. So I was confused by that, because I'm like, shouldn't it be the physically meek or strong in spirit? But I didn't get the word order. It's actually, blessed in spirit are the meek, right? Blessed in spirit are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So, there's a Nietzschean interpretation, but I was looking at it and I was like, maybe what it's saying is that when you're meek, meaning when you're weak, really, meek is weak, right? When you're weak, when you're put in a terrible situation, when you grow up in the middle of a mess and Sauron's about to take over and everything's gone to hell and it's just terrible, well, then you're in a position to become king of Gondor. You're in a position to inherit the earth because you've, like, look at and of course Tolkien is a Christian, right? So he intentionally like writes Aragorn as a kind of Christ figure in some ways. I mean, there are a lot of Christ figures, right? The hobbits and the Gandalf, and like they've all got their little Christian tint to them. But Aragorn, he's meek in a way, right? It's not that he's physically weak, right? But he's shy and he doesn't want to do it. And he's sort of apathetic, but it's sort of thrust on him. And then he inherits Gondor, right? He inherits the world city of Gondor. So kind of thinking about that, like if you are not meek, if you're prideful, if you're vainglorious, if you have everything, if you're on top of the world, then you're not actually going to go through the process of king making. You're not going to go through that process that really makes someone who is capable of dealing with these challenges. If you're insulated from the world, like if you grow up and you are given everything and you're rich and you just have it all, you know, you're thinking of like a Paris Hilton or someone, or Joe Biden's son, right? Joe Biden's son, he's just given it all and he's made a mess of his life. You know, he had everything handed to him. And also his mom died, various things happened to him. But, you know, so maybe Joe Biden's son's not the best example. But, you know, it's this idea that trying to take, like, the bad things and understand the way in which they're good or necessary. Because that's the only thing you can do. Right? That's the only, like, if you're trying to take a bad situation and make it good, you have to look at the bad as somehow containing the potential for some kind of evolution out of this situation. So you look at The Ring, or you look at whatever kind of thing is. I guess this is not so much a movie review. I was thinking about poetry and, you know, how, to me, I've tried to write poetry and record it and put it on video and put it out there, and I don't like it. And I don't think other people like it either. And maybe that's just particular to me, but I enjoy poetry when it's in a fantasy realm. Like, I enjoy poetry in the context of The Lord of the Rings, when Tolkien, he's got that poem, you know, the road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. When you have those poems in The Lord of the Rings, they make sense within the universe of The Lord of the Rings, because there's something lovely about The Lord of the Rings. There's something good in The Lord of the Rings. In that universe, there's innocence and there's goodness and there's something to cherish and there's something to value. And so within that universe, there's something genuine. Within that universe, there's something real that you can attach to and not feel betrayed. Like, you can love the hobbits and not fear that, like, oh, well, you know, you turn the next page and they're, like, beating their kids and they're on drugs and they're, like, you know, using their, they're using their free grocery money to buy cans of Coke to trade for drugs, or their EBT cards is what I meant to say. Like, you don't turn the page and you're not, like, suddenly, it's not like Game of Thrones where you invest in a character and then the character dies. Like, The Lord of the Rings is something you can invest in, and it's wholesome and it's holistic and it's harmonious. There's an evil component to it that threatens all of that, but there's an element of purity in The Lord of the Rings that you can attach yourself to and believe in and be like, I'm going to love the hobbits, I'm going to love the elves. And yeah, they've got problems. Like, the elves are kind of, you know, they don't understand what's going on, and sometimes they're, like, stuck up, and sometimes they're slow to act and they're hesitant. It's like, why aren't you helping, you know, the bearer of the ring? And they're like, this isn't going to work, and they sort of dismiss it. Right, so you can get frustrated with them, and you can get frustrated with the hobbits. They're like, you know, they're drinking and they're partying, they're not understanding what's going on, they're ignorant of the world. Or the men, the men of the world are like playing politics and they're, not understanding, like they don't get it, right? So you can get frustrated with them, but at the same time, because it's a fantasy realm, you can invest in it. And you can believe in it more than you can believe in the real world, because the real world can betray you and the real world can turn on a dime, and one day, you've got something and the next day you've got nothing. So that's not just a function of external events, but it's a function of like an internal psychology, a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're like, okay, well, I'm like all the negative terms in the world. I'm bad, I'm worthless, whatever. And then someone is like, hey, I'm a good person and I like you, or, you have some kind of friendship or you have a relationship or something. And then at some point there's a cognitive dissonance where you say to yourself, like, this doesn't make sense. I don't deserve, to have good things in my life. And so consciously or subconsciously, you sabotage, whether it's a job, a relationship, a friendship, any kind of situation. You're like, wait a second, I'm a bad guy. I don't deserve any of this. And so you self-sabotage, you do a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, that's not even to say that, woe is us, like the world is so terrible, everyone betrays us. But it's this internal confirmation bias of like, I don't deserve good things, and so every time something good comes into your life, you shove it away and you say, no, that couldn't be for me. No, that must have been for some other guy. You must be mistaken. No, you're talking to me? No. You must mean some other guy. Like, are you talking to him? Oh, the limo? That's you probably mean to pick up that guy. No, I don't belong in a limo. What, me? No, I belong in the public transportation. I belong in I belong somewhere else. So that's kind of, I think, one of the psychological problems that inhibits people from being poetic, and myself included, is that it's hard to be genuine, it's hard to be authentic, it's hard to invest in the world when not only are people kind of two-faced, and not only are people, you try to be like, hey guys, come on, like, I know everything up to this point has, not given us any reason to expect something better, but let's put our noses to the grindstone and let's try. Like, what do we have to lose? Like, let's do something. Let's build a project. Let's build a community. Let's work on something together. Let's make art. Like, let's be creative. Let's be productive. And you're like, yeah, guys, let's do it. And then what's the response? It's like, I don't know. Like, I guess. And then maybe you get people to, get like 10% of the way, and then people are like, I don't know about this, or they get bored, or it's like, hey, you're gonna help out today? No. So there's that element of it where people really do disappoint you. And then there's the other element where it's like, if people really do, thrust themselves onto you and they're like, hey, I want to help you. I want to be your friend. I want to give you a job. I want to give you free money. It's like, no, that's not for me. That must be some other guy. I don't deserve that. And it's a kind of, you could say it's Christian, but I think it's even pre-Christian, the desire, the guilt, the shame, the desire to self-punish. It's like, they don't really know me. I'm really, the Wojak, and I'm just, if they really knew if they really knew the weakness of my soul, if they really knew how insecure I was about myself, then they would really see who I am, and they wouldn't want to give me all this free stuff. They wouldn't want to help me. They wouldn't want to like me. So I'm going to, again, consciously or unconsciously say, no, thank you. That's not for me. So, when that happens, it's kind of hard to make poetry. And you can only have poetry in like an RPG or Lord of the Rings or a fantasy world or something like that, or art or film that creates a universe in which like poetry can exist. Because I don't think, for me, like, again, people can disagree with me, but I feel like the only good poetry is old poetry. Like, you're reading The Charge of the Light Brigade, or you're reading Edgar Allan Poe, or you're reading, some kind of literature from hundreds of years ago or even decades ago. for me, some of the most impactful poetry I ever read was the Aeneid, and that again is a world away. It is kind of interesting to think about, I guess, if we want to like really go hardcore critical here. This whole process I'm talking about here, where people don't feel like they matter because the world is just a giant quantity, and how can I impact this world of trillions when I'm just a single dollar bill, or I'm a single penny on the side of the road? Like, I don't matter because the system is so big and so gargantuan that I could never change anything. Therefore, why bother doing anything? And so that leads to this kind of self-domestication, self-imprisonment, and a kind of sensory deprivation as you become apathetic to all the experience around you. It's kind of like entering into a sensory deprivation chamber, and it basically kills yourself. So if that's the situation, we look at the ancient world, we look at Homer. And when we look at Homer, I mean, the Aeneid, of course, basically was written 1,000 years after Homer, or close to it, on that scale anyway. And I think the Aeneid is pretty impressive to me, and I remember reading that as a young man, and I remember reading that and saying, you can make a religion out of this. And yeah, that was some of the stuff that pulled me out of atheism. But I read that and I thought, oh man, this is so cool. I wish we could go back to this. But if you go 1,000 years prior and you look at Homer, and you look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you look at what was happening there, when you read that dialogue, I did the dialogue with Plato. Do we remember what the name of that dialogue was? Does that dialogue have a name? What was the shortest dialogue of Plato? I thought about it. I went on a 4-hour walk today, and I was thinking, what was the name of that dialogue? I read a dialogue, didn't I? Didn't I do that? Anyway, what if we Google search it? Shortest dialogue Plato. I don't know if I have something in my brain, or if this is just normal to not be able to spell things when you're talking at the same time. Is it the Clitophon? Cleitophon and Socrates. Question of what justice is. No. I don't think that's the one I was reading. Anyway, it was about the Lysias. Maybe that was the one. The orator Lysias. Anyway, it's about the dude where the guy says, you can only recite Homer and you are terrible at poetry in general. Like, you're terrible at poetry and you can only do Homer. And that's true, right? At the time, that's true. And so they're trying to figure out, like, how can this possibly be? How can this guy be so good at reciting Homer, but he's terrible at other forms of poetry? And my answer to that question is he is a replicator. He's a robot. He is just taking in Homer and he's just reproducing it, and he has no creativity. He has no flexibility. He is not a poetic person. He is simply like, he has memorized the poetic forms and he's just repeating them, but he can't regenerate them. He can't integrate them and play with them. And so he's sort of lost the, I guess we could say, the Platonic form of poetry that is behind poetry. Like, he can't access the beauty that inspires poetry. He can't access the muses. The muses don't speak to him. He simply, like, sees the forms, he sees the shadows in the cave, and he recites Homer over and over and over again. Everyone thinks he's great at it. But he's actually terrible as a poet. He's merely a computer, essentially. So, of course, an accentuated version of that is what we have today. I mean, we wish that we had bards, reciting Homer word for word in the forum. But I think that the replication, that's even prior to written language, right? But we often think about language as a simpler form than poetry. We think of poetry as like, oh, when you write poetry, you're taking prose and then you're making it more flowery, and you're adding rhyming, you're adding rhythm. But, I kind of think about it in the opposite way. I think that poetry is the most basic form of communication, and that poetry then becomes desacralized and secularized and made into these interchangeable parts. It's like, okay, well, originally people spoke in poetry, they spoke in song, like everyone was constantly singing to each other. And then somehow we lost that, and these words and these songs and these melodies became detextualized and decontextualized. And now we just have prose, and it's just a car manual, and it's like any word is replaceable with another word. And you look at the English language, and the English language is the most secular, liberal language in the world because it has the least grammar to it. Like, there's no noun endings. Like, cat is cat is cat. It doesn't change. There's no, you have cat and then you have cats, I guess. So there's a plural form, but there's no nominative, dative, accusative, genitive, ablative, vocative case. It's just cat and cats. That's it. And you have the singular and you have the plural. You don't have the singular, the dual, the triple, and then the plural or the many. You don't have those forms of cases. Also, you don't have male cats and female cats. You do have that with dogs still. You have a name for a female dog, which is now a swear, but originally was not. But with cats, I guess some people can say a tomcat, right? But that's like this older slang. We don't distinguish between the male cat and the female cat, the cat and the catette. And you can distinguish between those two in older forms of language. So we've lost that because English is this Creole language. It's this very pragmatic, the Normans spoke French and the Anglo-Saxons spoke a Germanic language. And they're like, how are we going to communicate? So they made a Creole. And in the process of making a Creole, they destroyed all of the poetic, organic elements of that language. And you could say, oh, but how can you say that? Because Shakespeare is so beautiful compared to what we have today. And Chaucer is so beautiful compared to what we have today. How can you insult the English language like that? And what about all the English literature? And English is a beautiful language and blah, blah, blah. And you can say that. And I guess that's your perspective and I can't refute it. But I guess this is my perspective, right? This is my perspective that we've lost the poetic, that the poetic is the origin of language, that the poetic is the origin of humanity, that life is poetry, that poetry is just about harmony. It's just about making things fit together. And that's what life is about. Like, physics is about things working together. How does the system work together? It's not separate from one another. It's the science of physics is about how things interact, and poetry is about interaction. And when you take away poetry and you make prose, you're removing the interactive field between the words and the meaning of the words, and everything becomes secularized, and it becomes a car repair manual. And it can be translated into any language, and there's no loss of meaning because it's like a programming language. It's like C++, and we're all going to become computer programmers, and that's the job of the future, is that we all have to eliminate the poetic from our minds. But there's something transformative even by becoming a computer programmer. I don't do a lot of programming myself, but some people who talk about it say that it can be like a poetry, that there's such a thing as elegant code and simplistic code, and that there's such a thing as poetry and coding. And so maybe there's some event horizon where we go far enough into the secularization of denaturing, detextualizing, decontextualizing, deterritorializing. We rip everything out of its womb and we throw it in the river, and then eventually it flows for long enough that somebody comes and plucks it out, and through technology, we can go through an animalistic process where we, through basically a violent rupture of society, where there's a great flood and everything's destroyed, but somehow out of that, there's a small patch of dry land and a little green shoot comes out, and then all of a sudden, you see a bird fly by, and the bird lays an egg and a human being comes out of it. And this kind of mythical, magical process, there's always a return, I think. Maybe that's me being too optimistic, but I think that there's the possibility of a return of life as poetry, of like living life is where we're just singing to one another. And we can do that because it's genuine. And now if you perform Shakespeare, it's silly. And now like classical music is silly and it's old and it's stupid and it doesn't make sense. And all these things that used to be beautiful and genuine and authentic, it was like we were really trying to reach God. And now that's like silly and try hard and you should just be ironic and apathetic. It's like we're not quite there yet where we can when I see the guys in the That Feel with No GF film, it's like they chose some of the weakest individuals or presenting individuals as possible. I mean, Cantbot's in there. I don't want to insult Cantbot because he's smarter than me. But the pair of two guys, they so just a lot of the things they say, maybe they selectively made them look bad even, I don't know, but they just made them say things like, oh, we complain a lot about all these problems, but we're just saying it to be edgy and offensive, and there's no real actual problems besides like maybe it was like our upbringing, like maybe if there were more Alcoholics Anonymous programs, or like these are the implications, like maybe if the state like abducted us from our parents like with child services and put us in a good home, everything would have worked out. Or like I don't know what the proposed, we could argue about the implicit solutions. There's just the gun shooting scene is the climax, and everything after that is like, oh, it's all going to be okay, and my problems aren't actually real, and I'm just like pretending, and it's all a big joke, and it cheapens the reality of the situation that there is a problem. And just saying, oh, we're just, it was just a phase, it was a mood, it's all a mindset, like, oh, I was just feeling sad, and like, if you just leave the house, like, you'll feel better, man. Like, and those things are objectively true, but just because we can do things to improve our individual lives doesn't mean that there isn't like a global flood happening. There's a flood happening, and some people are drowning and some people are splashing around having a good time. But there are some people right now face down, like drowning. And then there are other people splashing around. And I guess like when we ask why is, they bring up this term demographic in the film. Why is there a particular demographic that's affected by this? And I would argue it's not because that particular demographic is being targeted exactly. Because I think anyone who is sensitive, like they talk about nerdy kids. What does that mean, nerdy kids? They say, nerdy kids are really affected by the world we live in. Like they're really left behind. And so I think really what that means is it's like sensitive kids, sensitive, intelligent kids are affected by what's going on in the world because they sense the miasma that surrounds them. They sense the water torture of the drip, drip, drop on the forehead of culture, of TikTok, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, Google, Amazon. They just feel it tapping at their forehead, and it's like it makes you like, it's just like, just get it over with, just make it over, just stop, we're just done. So they feel that and they're sensitive to that. Whereas people who are really dumb and insensitive and brutish and animalistic, they're still doing their drugs and drinking alcohol and having the casual sex, and that's satisfying. That's okay to them. That's enough for them. But for people who are sensitive, people who are intelligent, people who are really seeking for the truth and like seeking for true value and like seeking for religion at the end of the day, who might not want to admit it because that's cringe or that's not, the God is dead, bro, or whatever. People are seeking for religion. They're not satisfied with that. They might engage with it. They might use drugs. They might have casual sex. They might engage in all those things. But at the end of the day, it's not enough. Whereas for the majority of people, or a certain type of people, it is enough. You look at the depression stats and they're different. And I don't think it's because like there's a conspiracy to like make nerds depressed. I think it's just that the culture is this mercantile capitalist culture, and people who are like animals love capitalism, and people who are like human beings basically hate capitalism, and it makes them want to kill themselves. Like, I guess rats. Well, even rats. Like the Milgram, not the Milgram experiments. That experiment with rats where they put a bunch of densely overpopulated rats in a cage, and they find out like the rats are starting to groom themselves. And they stop having sex, and they like start acting like humans in civilization. Right? They're domesticated, so they become infertile. And when you look at, even rats don't like to be domesticated. So maybe insects. Maybe insects are one of the few creatures on this planet who are fine with domestication, like pure civilization, like living in a beehive, like living in a little cell, a little hexagram inside a colony where you're just a number. And like the insectoid mindset's very real. And there's millions, if not billions, of people who have that mindset, who are like, they don't question anything that's going on. And in fact, they prefer this system to a warrior or a priestly system where, they probably wouldn't do as well. But people who are not motivated by money, people who are not hive-minded, are doing very badly. And so that affects people of all different kinds of backgrounds, but maybe it does have certain statistical biases. So we talked about Homer, we talked about Aragorn, we talked about TFW, no GF. We watched the film. Would I recommend it? I would recommend a severely cut version of the film. I was not really emotionally impacted by the film. Again, I watched it while I was walking for 4 hours. So I watched it intermittently. I walked for like an hour or two. I started watching it. I would stop watching. I would think about something for like 30 minutes in my head, and then I would continue watching it. So I didn't really get the full experience. I also watched it on my phone, so I was like listening in my ear. And I didn't have headphones, so I wasn't watching it. I was like listening to it and then occasionally looking at it. And so I wasn't like giving it maybe its due diligence to really get the full impact. I wasn't reading, like, they have this miniature text on the screen that you can't read unless it's like a big screen or something. So, I would have skipped the text scenes, like look, here's a screenshot of like us scrolling through Twitter. Like, I would have cut out that. I would have cut out all of that. And I liked the interviews. I liked the guys who are talking, even though I, criticize the way in which they're presented as like very, very weak, very much like, there's no solutions, and there's just like, we just have to feel better about ourselves. And like, if you see somebody on a bus, like wave hello and like tell them everything's going to be all right. And like, that's how we're going to solve these problems. Like, there's no actual like structural, like, there's no problems with capitalism. Like, we don't need some kind of radical change or anything like that. I wasn't a fan of that. But I think if you had more interviews and didn't just interview like these guys who frankly present in a very soft way, is all I can say. They're, if you interviewed some guys who were more hardcore, or who said, yeah, this life that people are confronted with, this way of thinking, is like a prison, and we have to break out of it, not by like, going to the gym or just going to the gym, but we need to like kind of get angry about it. And anger is actually a rational response, and it's like something you have to go through. And I think you pass through anger. To me, I was thinking of like an angry son. I was thinking the opposite of this movie is like an angry son, and he's fiery and he's bright and he's kind of laughing, but he's laughing angrily. He's like, haha. He's like, I don't know how to portray it exactly, but he's laughing with frustration. He's kind of a man. He's sort of driven to the point of insanity. You see moments like this in the Joker movie, but he's sort of like driven to the point of insanity. And like, people are, maybe it's like a Dragon Ball Z scene where like, Goku, he's been like beaten to a pulp, and like they're stomping on his head. They're like beating him up and they're kicking his ribs, and it's like, oh no, the last defender of Earth, they're humiliating him, and like everything's over. And then he's just like, he just starts laughing, like they're kicking him and like blood is coming out of his mouth. And he's just laughing, and they're like, stop laughing. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, where you should be crying right now. And then all of a sudden he's like powering up and his hair is turning blonde and he's getting angry and he's laughing. I was kind of thinking of that. Maybe that's too much of a war. People criticize sometimes. People say like, "Oh, you reference some like warrior imagery. I thought you were critical of that." I don't know. Um, I don't know. Sometimes like certain extreme images produce opposites to me. So I saw it was a very lunar film. It's very like we're like in a snowy, like dirty town. We're in like or El Paso or wherever, and it's just like sad. It's melancholic. There's like a bittersweet quality to everything. We're nostalgic for a past we don't even know exists. It just makes me want to like laugh angrily and just stare at the sun and like feel the light like burn through my skin and something like burn away all of this dirt and this filth and this weakness and all of this like just softness and all of this like this apathy and inability to confront what's actually happening and this weak smile of like, oh, it'll all be okay, bro, and oh, we just have to be friends and smile on the bus and like every little bit counts, bro. Like just like laugh angrily at that and be like, no, no. Like you have to do something different. You have to do something completely different. So I don't know. I don't know if that's what I do. I don't know if I'm. That was my reaction to the movie. I don't know that I actually live up to my reaction 24/7. I don't know if I actually live a life that is true to that reaction that I felt after watching this movie for like over the course of a 4-hour walk. I don't know if my day-to-day life really lives up to the expectation of a burning, cackling, angry sun who has been beaten, you know, the lunar man has been beaten and now this light is like burning from within him and burning away his weakness. You know, that he's the diamond, the fire is burning away all his weakness and he's transcending his individuality. He's like Aragorn. He's transcending that guy who sits in the back of the bar. No, now he's the king of Gondor. He's not just like some lonely incel dude. No, now he's like the king, and he is like integrated into society, and the civilization is like his body and it's extension of him. Like the Christians talk about, like the church is the body of Christ. Like now this lunar man, he's transforming the supernova. He's exploding. He's sort of imploding and then exploding. This big bang, this horizon event, this gamma ray burst, and he's this star. And he's emitting all this light and heat and energy. It's so intense. It's like blinding. You can't even see it. Like as an individual, he loses himself, and it's like he's gaining access to the Earth's energies, and he's powering up, and he's becoming so big. He's engulfing the Earth with his spirit, and he's sort of becoming one. And he's entering into that flow state. He's entering into that poetic state where he's no longer like writing the car manual. He's no longer using language in this quantitative, repetitive, oh, let's, repeat Homer for the millionth time. No, he's like living in this moment. He's living genuinely, authentically. He doesn't have the self-doubt. He doesn't have the questioning of himself and the refusal of power because like, oh, I don't deserve power. I'm not good enough, because he dies to himself. Again, another big Christian myth, not in a negative sense, but like a Christian picture is like you have to kill that lunar man, that dead weight, that stone cold, that heart of stone. You have to kill that lunar man in like an explosion. Like you have to blow him up with TNT, and you have to allow this supernova star to explode and emit all this energy and light and heat to the point where you basically you are dead. Like that former self that you're hanging on to, that lunar man that you're afraid, like that, he's like lunar man, he's like nostalgic and bittersweet. Like that guy died, he's exploded, and now you have the solar man and the solar man steps forth, and he's like not even a man. He's I guess in a Nietzschean sense, he's like beyond humanity. He's beyond individuality, and he's connected to everything in the earth because, of course, the sun reaches all these different, like the sun shines in the planet and exposes the planet to light, and therefore all these plants come up and life comes up. And there's all this receptivity, like there's a relationship. The lunar man is isolated. The lunar man is the incel. He's alone. And the solar man is like projecting his light onto the earth. You remember when I talked about, this was a while ago, remember when I was playing around with the concept of like the moon is masculine and the sun is feminine? There's something very Apollonian about the incel, the individual, who like, oh, I'm sitting in the corner. I don't want to be around other people, and I'm afraid of how people will perceive me, and I'm holding on to my individuality, even though it's like a worship of my own like sadness. Like that's what authentically it means to be me, and I'm like an emo. Like that's this masculine lunar man, and then there's kind of this feminine solar explosion where this life bursts forth, and it's a kind of a feminine Chthonian, like again, this like a solar life producing energy that and I guess again, this kind of inversion, I haven't done it for a while. It really annoyed people when I did this. It's like you're just trolling at this point. I was trolling myself though. I was trolling myself as much as anyone else because I thought it was interesting. I was trying to turn things over in my mind like a Tetris cube. I'm trying to figure out how the pieces really work together by saying like, well, what if we just turned everything on its head? What would happen then? So I tried to imagine what that would be like. But I think there is like the relationship of the solar man. The solar man is, he loses his individuality. And I think there's something feminine about that, of the loss of individuality, of becoming part of something greater than yourself. You're sort of submitting. There's sort of an act where like the self submits to the solar man. Maybe that's the feminine aspect, where you sort of receive the solar man of like, well, I'm not the solar man. Like I could never be the solar man, but I'm going to like submit myself to the solar man. Maybe the solar man's Christ, but the lunar man is like attached to himself. He's like, no, I like all my rocky craters and all my flaws, and that's what defines me. That's what makes me unique. And the person who submits to the solar man, maybe this is the earth man, I don't know. Maybe this is a third person. But like there's a submission to the solar man where you're like, you know what? I don't care about my flaws. I don't care about my individuality. I don't care if I die and my individuality enters into the void and the blackness and goes to hell, or like it's eternal darkness and like non-existence and my existential crisis. Like I don't care if I die forever and like there's no heaven or hell, and it's like total, the scary thoughts when you're lying in bed at night and like you're like, oh, I'm gonna die someday, and all of my quirky little individuality, and like I'm not going to exist. I'm not going to have thoughts, and my brain's going to be dead, and I won't be able to intellectualize and abstract, and I won't have these narratives, and I won't be speaking, and I won't possess anything, and I'll be gone. And that fear is a kind of attachment, the Buddhist would say. It's a kind of attachment to our flaws and our sins, and it holds us down, and it makes us live in this fearful state. And then at some point, in order to allow the solar man to be born, you kind of have to like say like, I don't care if I die as an individual. Like, I don't care about any of that. All of that is worthless to me. I don't care about myself. I don't care about my individuality. I care about God, and I care about incarnating God here on the planet Earth. And if in order to do that, I have to sacrifice everything that makes me me, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to lose everything that I have and that I am, because all of that's worthless, and I'm just trying to pursue this thing. And if I fail, then so what? I had nothing to lose, because I was nothing before, I'm nothing now, I will be nothing in the future. The only thing that exists is this solar man who, maybe if the only quest I have in my life is to incarnate the solar man. And that's what Aragorn does. He starts off as the lunar man. He's hiding. He's hidden. He's like over in the corner. And then he becomes the solar man. Literally, his complexion changes, his hair changes. He wears the crown, the solar crown, the corona, right? Not the disease, but the corona crown, right? That's what corona means. I think it's also related to corn, meaning horn, like cornucopia. So he wears the corona, he wears the crown, like the corona of the sun in the eclipse. When the sun is in eclipse, you can see all the crown of the sun. So he puts on the crown and he becomes the king, and he accepts he loses the Aragorn before, the incel kid, the Aragorn of before, goes to the 9 to 5 job. He allows that Aragorn to die. He kind of kills that Aragorn, never to return, and he becomes the solar man, and he loses his individuality, and he loses all of his like self-pitying, and he's like, that Aragorn is dead. Now I forget what his new name. He takes on a new name that's like Isildur, but it's not Isildur. I forget what Aragorn's esoteric real name is. But he takes on a new name, I think. Or he has an elvish name, doesn't he? It's like Elisar or something. I think he takes on King Elisar is his new name. And so he loses Aragorn. That identity's dead. Now he has a new identity. And that identity is just, it is solely a creation of his relationship to the people of Gondor, that he is their ruler. And the reason he's their ruler is because he's the descendant of his ancestors. And so in some ways, he's just an incarnation of his ancestors. In the same way the Egyptians would say, like, the Pharaoh is just an incarnation of Ra. He's not an individual. He's not a human being. He's not a person. He's just an incarnation of Ra, just like his father and his father before him. So that's all Aragorn is. He's like, I'm not that weak, like, incel guy anymore. That guy doesn't exist. He's dead. The person that's before you is just another incarnation of this line of Isildur, all the way going back to this mythical, this mythical group of people. And I'm just, the only existence that I have is in my relation to the people of Gondor. Without them, I'm nothing. My kingship only matters in relation to, I am, heading this civilization. And the guy I was before was like, no, I don't need Gondor. Gondor doesn't need me. I'm just going to be on my own. And he just allows that to die. And he kills that. And he's like, no, I'm King Elisar. That's who I am. Aragorn is dead. So that's the transformation from the lunar incel into the solar king. And that's kind of not what was portrayed in the movie. I feel like they left out a couple scenes to kind of show that happening. But maybe that would have, because I think the film sort of rode this. It was basically trying to create sympathy for incels by being like, well, if people would just be like nice to them, like, and maybe they'd be better. And like all of their jokes are fake. Like they're just saying things to make people upset because really they're like weak. Like the only reason they make jokes is because they're really sad, and that's why they make like all of these jokes is because they're very sad. And there's something true about that. There are pathetic people who legitimately just say edgy things because they are very sad people. And so it's not like that's even a bad or even an untrue narrative. But the problem is it's just trying to garner sympathy through pity. And I thought that was disgusting. I thought this attempt to just be like, oh, well, pity them. Oh, feel bad for them. They're just really sad. It's like, no, at some point you have to transcend that sadness, and you have to, I don't know, maybe there was a bit of that. There was like a bodybuilding dude at the end who was like, now I'm a bodybuilder, and he was like squatting 145, which, hey, I can't really squat, so, better than me, right? Better than me, but still, it's like, he was like, I think I'm going to start competing in weightlifting. It's like, are you showing two plates on that bar there? Is that 2 plates? Is that a 45-pound bar with 245s? Is that 135 that you're squatting right now? I don't know, but it went from being, we're the saddest, most pathetic men in the world, to now we're like mediocre, like guys who have 2 jobs and also go to the gym. Like that was the story arc of literally the scum of the earth to, okay, I guess we're like mediocre, like striving for middle class, like lower middle class. or like upper lower class, I guess. And to me, that is just a waste of potential, because there's something to be said there. There's something to be said about millions and millions of men across the globe who are really in this position, and you can just drag them down into edgy, taboo breaking. That's one option. Or you can just dismiss it all and say like, oh, just take antidepressants and go to the gym and things like that. Or you can take that, like, there's all this. I feel like there's potential energy there, and you can take that and just show something that's, again, a little more dramatic. I just feel like the emotional catharsis was very unsatisfying at the end of like, oh, well, it's all going to be okay. We're all going to make it. It's like, no, we are not going to make it. We are going to die, and something new is going to be born. Like, I want to see the end. I want to see the end. Like, I don't know what I want to see. I don't know if, I want to see like giant coliseums being built. I want to see like new pyramids being built. I want to see like mass religious rituals. I want to see something big happening, right? That would be cathartic. That would be leading all of this negativity into finally some explosive positivity. And again, the only moment where I felt like that possibly could have happened was the gun shooting scene. But again, even that's kind of pathetic. Like, oh, we would never hurt anybody. Like, all of our threats were fake. Like, we just shoot guns for fun. We would never use them for anything. Like, I don't have any guns, but because that's not my thing. I don't believe in physical violence. But at least representationally or metaphorically, it's like that was the moment where maybe all this potential energy is going to become something kinetic and effective and directed. But it never turned out that way. It just stayed like, oh, well, now I do my 135 squats and it's going to get better. And I go to the bar and I do karaoke sometimes. I guess that's the solution. It's like, this is an opportunity to do something that is deeply religious. And a guy was wearing a cross. They didn't talk about religion at all. That was also disappointing. So there was a potential there, and someone could still take the same subject matter, make a really great cathartic moment. Just like The Lord of the Rings has a great cathartic moment with the battles and the victories and the death of the heroes and, like Boromir, his death. And so there are these moments of catharsis that you could have had there but I guess the people in that film were just a little bit too mundane to do something like that. It needed a book club video. Someone asked me recently, people have been asking me what I think about the book club, and I don't know. Now it's the end of the video. I guess to kind of sum it up, it's an enigma, and I never really know. I thought I knew, but now I don't think I know anymore. But that's okay. And sometimes I feel like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like the book club represents that kind of solar explosion of like not caring anymore, allowing all your self-doubt to die, and just doing something radical. And that's what I like about the book club. And maybe in reality, I'm more Campbot style. I'm more an aspiring intellectual who makes abstractions and puts things in I've never thought of that way before. Ooh, that's a very big brain, hot, edgy, spicy take you got there. And maybe I'm more on that side of things. And so in a way, it's like if you took the book club seriously, which I don't even know if that's possible, but maybe even putting that aside for a moment, if you take the concept of like being a solar man seriously, then and you compare that to what this channel is, then it's like you're kind of comparing opposites in a way, aren't you? But nonetheless, yeah, so I don't know if I would be able to make a better movie. I don't know if I have what it takes. But I think there's someone out there And I don't know if it's the book club because it's very exhausting to be a solar man. It's very exhausting because people keep trying to draw you back into quote unquote reality, the real world. You gotta have a job and you gotta stop being crazy all the time and you gotta interact with normal people in a normal way. And it's like, you don't understand. Like, I'm a solar man. Like, I'm not on your level. Like, you don't understand. So it's hard to do that all the time. But the ideal is there. And it's very cinematic and it's very cathartic and it could be used to make great cinema. But they chose not to do that because I guess that would probably destroy the ability of, cat ladies to feel sympathy with incels. I think that was the purpose of the movie, was to make middle-aged women feel like, oh, that could be my son, and I feel so bad for these kids. They're so pathetic. Like, if there was a moment of catharsis where these kids, like, ripped off their shirts and, like, went Fight Club mode, or just something crazy, like, it doesn't have to be physically violent, but if they just, like, did something that was impactful, not just, like, I have 2 jobs, I go to the gym, I do karaoke, like, I make tweets, if it was something like, we're starting a religion. We're starting a cult. Like, we're doing something crazy, and we're totally destroying our identities and being reborn. Like, we're becoming fanatical whateverists. Christians, pagans, Muslims. I don't care. Just do something. I think that would have destroyed the potential. That the cat ladies would have been like, I had sympathy for them at first, but then they went and did something crazy. And you know what? Those kids are just no good, and we need to, I thought one of the best scenes in the film where one of the kids is explaining, like, this tweet that I saw a while back. It was like this woman explaining, like, how, like, women need to sit their teenage sons down and explain to them why Trevor Noah is funny and, like, force them to watch The Daily Show and, like, have a discussion with them on, like, why is Jon Stewart funny, and, like, let's really understand this, and, like, is he punching up or is he punching down, and, like, this is, like, we're gonna understand, like, what politically correct humor is. And he said, like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. I thought that was a pretty good take. I liked that part. But an hour-long review. Hope you like it. Thank you to Farino for the request. It's only through people requesting things in the right way. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't like nitpicking. I don't like when people haven't tried to answer their question themselves. I don't like when people ask a question like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what's your definition of that word that you're using? What do you mean the solar man? I don't know. What do you think the solar man means to you? Oh, well, I think the solar man is like when you overcome yourself. Okay, well, great. You answered your own question. So I don't like those kind of, like, nitpicky definitional semantic questions. Like, why don't you tell me what you think, and then, like, work a little bit at it, and then we'll get somewhere. But if it's just like, well, what do you mean by this? So what do you mean by that? What does this mean? It's like, well, why don't you tell me what you think it means, and we'll go from there. Like, I would much rather work with someone else's semantic framework than like, tie things down to, like, my semantic frame. I'd rather work with people's language that they already have and try to tease out the understanding that's already implicit within their experience than try to, like, force something on them from the outside. Because I think all consensus building has to come from within. It can't be, like, forced from outside unless I'm, like, in your face and I'm, like, slapping you across the face with graphs or something, which is hard to do through the computer. But, or I'm appealing to some higher authority. Like, look at what Pew Research said. So I like Farino's request. I like Farino. I like people who create music and art and cinema and do work for the channel and create intros. And, I respect people who create content and create art. And, it's like, I feel indebted to them. I feel there's almost an economization. Maybe that's a degradation of the relationship, but it's like when people put art into the world, it makes me feel like they've deposited something into the comments and I need to give something to them back. Like when you see a guy on the side of the road and he's playing the violin and he's got a hat and you throw in $5 into the hat, you didn't have to do that, but he was just like projecting art into the world. And so you're like, I'm going to give him $5. So that's kind of how I feel like when people project things into the world and they're not necessarily getting rewarded for it. I mean, if someone's like making 6 figures with their art, I don't really feel the need to help them out. But if someone's just like on the street corner, like just making it for the sake of doing it, I kind of feel like if they make a request of me, I feel like the least I can do is honor that request. Do you hear what I'm saying? So those are the kind of requests that I like. Thank you, Farino. Thank you for watching. Thanks you for listening. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.